about today. Something everyone thinks about, but not everyone talks about. Today, we're going to talk about sex. Now, don't worry, this isn't some weird biology class. Instead, we're going to talk about the history and sometimes ridiculous ways different cultures and historical periods have dealt with the topic of sex. Here we go. So, sex is one of the most universal human experiences. It's true. Yet, in many places, people act like it should never be mentioned. In some cultures, it's straight up an open topic. In others, it's wrapped in secrecy and shame. Why? Well, there are a lot of reasons, and this is the reason why I wanted to talk about this. Because why? First, let's talk about religion. Many religions have strict rules about sex: who can have it, when, and how. These rules were often created to keep societies structured and predictable, right? You can control the people, more peace. That's the theory. For example, ancient Hindu traditions gave us, yes, the Kama Sutra, which, believe it or not, it isn't just about sex. It's about love, relationships, and a balanced life. Meanwhile, in medieval Europe, Christian teaching treated sex as something sinful outside of marriage, and even the talk about it could get you in trouble. Then there's history itself. Let's go back to ancient Rome and Greece. We're actually pretty open about sex. They even built statues of naked people, and certain same-sex relationships were widely accepted. The Romans even decorated bathhouses with erotic art. But then medieval Europe came along and suddenly sex was something to be whispered about. The Catholic Church became more powerful and pushed the idea that desire had to be controlled, of course. Monks and priests had to take vows of celibacy, and women were expected to be pure before marriage. Fast forward to the Victorian era of the 1800s, and things got even stricter. Talking about sex was practically illegal. Women had to dress in layers and layers of clothing, and even mentioning body parts like legs was considered improper. People believed some truly bizarre myths. One that I heard throughout my whole life, which was that masturbation could cause blindness. Yes, that one. Society had gone from celebrating sexuality to pretending it didn't exist. Now, sex isn't just about love and attraction, it's also about power. Throughout history, people in control have used sex as a way to enforce rules and maintain dominance. I'll give you some quick examples throughout the world. Take ancient China. For example, emperors had multiple wives and secondary wives, while ordinary people were expected to stick to one partner, the hypocrisy. The emperor's household wasn't just about pleasure, it was also about politics. The women in these households had little personal freedom, but some managed to influence major decisions and even shape government policies. Another example is in the Ottoman Empire. The Sultan's households was filled with hundreds of women, many whom had little say in their lives. They were slaves, essentially. But occasionally, one of them, like Khurram Sultan or Roxalana, would rise to power and influence the empire's future. We will not get into too much history, but just to give you an idea that people traded in sex for power. So this is one of the examples I wanted to give you. And we come again to the medieval Europe. Medieval Europe had its own strict rules. The Catholic Church set moral laws, and marriage was often used as a political tool rather than a personal choice. King Henry VIII, that King Henry, for example, wanted to divorce his wife so badly that he broke away from the Catholic Church and started his own religion. That's how bad it was. Even in modern history, sex has been used to control people. Under Nazi Germany, LGBTQ individuals were prosecuted and sent to concentration camps. During Mao's Cultural Revolution in China, public displays of affection and personal freedoms were heavily restricted to enforce collective discipline. Of course, even language shows how power works. There are far more negative words for women who have multiple partners than for men. A man with many lovers is called a ladies' man, while a woman in the same situation is often called something far less flattering. This imbalance has been around for centuries and still affects how people talk about sex today. I mean, the fact is, sex has never just been a private matter. It has always been a tool for control. The rules around it aren't just about morality, they're about who gets to make the rules. Now, different cultures have different rules when it comes to sex, and these rules have been shaped by history, religion, and social customs. Let's look at how different parts of the world approach relationships and intimacy. So let's start with the first one, public affection. In France and Italy and in Spain, where I am, kissing and hugging in public is totally normal. But in countries like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, even holding hands can get you in trouble. Meanwhile, in Japan, public affection has traditionally been seen as impolite, though younger generations are starting to change that. Premarital sex. In Western countries like Sweden, Denmark, and the Netherlands, living together before marriage is not a big deal. But in places like Indonesia, Pakistan, and Iran, premarital sex is illegal and can even lead you to jail. In India, opinions are mixed. It's a huge country. Big cities are becoming more accepting, while the rural areas still see it as shameful. Same-sex relationships. History is full of cultures that accepted same-sex relationships. Ancient China, this was what I found interesting. Ancient China recorded same-sex love stories among royals and scholars. And in Japan, samurai warriors had male lovers in a practice called wakashudo. And let's not forget ancient Greece, where relationships between older and younger men were seen as a way to pass down wisdom. On the flip side of that, many modern countries still criminalize same-sex relationships. Uganda has strict anti-LGBTQ laws, while places like Canada and Spain have fully embraced same-sex marriage. Modesty and dress codes. Now, the idea of modesty changes depending on where you are. In Victorian England, in the 1800s, women covered up almost every inch of skin. And even table legs were sometimes covered because they were too suggestive. In contrast, in Pacific Island cultures, women going topless was completely normal until, ready for it, European colonizers arrived and decided it wasn't. Marriage and polygamy. In some African and Middle Eastern countries, polygamy is legal and accepted, often based on Islamic traditions that allow men to have multiple wives. Countries like Nigeria, Sudan, and Saudi Arabia still recognize polygamous marriages. Meanwhile, in the West, monogamy has been the standard for centuries. But even that hasn't stopped powerful men from bending the rules. Again, we just gave you an example of King Henry, who changed the whole church so that he could get remarried. So just let me leave you with this. What's normal in one country might be shocking in another, because society's views on sex are always changing, shaped by history, politics, and evolving beliefs. In conclusion, sex is a natural part of life. We know this. Yet, throughout history, it's been treated as something secret, shameful, and even dangerous. But as we've seen, taboos are not set in stone. They change over time. What was shocking yesterday might be normal tomorrow. Looking at the history of sex tells us more than just how people reproduce. It's more than that. It shows us how cultures change, how power works, and how societies evolve. From ancient Greece's open attitudes to the strict rules of Victorian England to the modern debate around sexuality, one thing is very clear. Sex was never just about biology. It's always been about who we are as people. I hope you enjoyed this podcast, guys. I found it interesting. And the reason I decided to talk about this because I was having a conversation the other day and I felt a little uncomfortable because it was about a sexual nature, and it was a little uncomfortable. And I was like, why do I feel this way? And so, not me, many people might feel the same way as well. And history tells us it's been part of humanity since history has been written. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I'm Mikael, and this is what I learned today. Bye.